Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time, the bloody Union attacks slowly pushed back the Confederate entrenchments closer to Petersburg, but the small successes were never exploited by the Union High Command. Now, the Union continue their bloody assaults. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Since June 15th, P.G.T. Beauregard and his two divisions held off numerous Union attacks from four enemy corps. Those attacks slowly pushed the Confederate line back, but it was hard-won ground for the Union. As the 17th turned into the 18th, Beauregard ordered a withdrawal from the makeshift line of entrenchments that threw back the attacks on the 17th, and pulled back to a line determined by Beauregard's chief engineer, David B. Harris. Harris was from Central Virginia and attended West Point Military Academy, graduating in 1833. He only served a couple of years in the Army before resigning to become a civil engineer, and then became a tobacco farmer. He joined the Confederate cause when the war broke out and had served with Beauregard since First Manassas. Edward Porter Alexander declared Harris the very type of everything brave and modest and gentle, of indefatigable energy, and of most excellent engineering judgment and skill. Harris, along with Beauregard's artillery commander, used the 17th to mark a new line with white stakes. When Beauregard's troops withdrew to this line, the men began working with all their energy to create this new line, called the Harris Line. They used their bayonets, knives, and tin cups to construct the entrenchments, the same entrenchments that would be used in the defense of Petersburg for the next nearly 10 months. One Georgian who dug the earthworks declared, "We worked for life." Knowing his time to capture the city was waning, Army of the Potomac commander George Meade ordered all of his corps to make an attack in the early morning. The 18th and 2nd Corps launched their attacks before dawn, but got pinned down when they came within rifle range of the new Confederate earthworks. Although they only had a few hours to work, the rebel entrenchments were very impressive, and it halted those two corps. Ambrose Burnside's 9th Corps got started later that morning and ran into the same problems as the other corps. Burnside wired to find out why Governor K. Warren's 5th Corps wasn't coming up on his left. Meade, hearing about this lack of movement, urged all of his corps commanders forward. Eventually, the 5th Corps moved out, but when they got within rifle range of the Confederate rifled muskets, most of the Union Corps burrowed into the earth to escape the bullets. Robert E. Lee, the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, arrived in Petersburg about 11:30 a.m. and met with Beauregard at the Customs House. After speaking, they rode out to some high ground to observe the landscape. Beauregard suggested launching a strike against the Union left flank, but Lee was content remaining on the defensive, at least until an opportunity arose. Meade was frustrated at the lack of coordination and ordered all of his corps to again make an assault at noon. The 18th and 2nd Corps were the only ones to coordinate their attack. Parts of the 18th and 2nd Corps, along with one brigade from the 6th Corps under Oliver Edwards, attacked together at noon. One Union soldier called the area they were to attack a death trap, and it certainly was. They attacked at and near Colquitt's Salient, named after the Georgia Brigade that defended it. A historian of the battle wrote of Colquitt's Salient that it had been excavated so as to mount the guns only 2 feet above ground level. This configuration reduced the tendency of artillerists to fire over attackers' heads. A cornfield sloping gently up to the rebel lines provided an unobstructed field of fire. They would face an uphill run fully exposed to a murderous combined arms fire. John Gibbon, a division commander of the 2nd Corps, was notified that morning that he had been promoted to Major General. Before the attack commenced, he asked to be sworn in immediately, so that if he died, his wife would get the appropriate pension. Burnside's corps did not attack. None of the division commanders knew about such an order. When Warren got the order to attack, he wired Meade that he could not have his corps ready to make the assault until at least 1 p.m. Meade fired back, "I cannot change the hour in the order of attack just issued. Everyone else is ready. You will attack as soon as possible after the hour designated, and endeavor to be ready at that hour." A back and forth commenced between Warren and the Army commander, and it got heated as Warren insisted that his attack couldn't be made without support, and reported that Burnside's troops had only advanced a short distance, so he could go no further. Meade wrote to Warren and Burnside that, "I am greatly astonished at your dispatch of 2 p.m. What additional orders to attack you require I cannot imagine. My orders have been explicit, and are now repeated, that you each immediately assault the enemy with all your force, and if there is any further delay the responsibility and the consequences will rest with you." With that, Warren ordered his attack to begin at 3 p.m. His divisions began to form up. When the soldiers found out what they were about to do, a Pennsylvanian in Joshua Chamberlain's brigade said, "My heart dropped to my shoes." Chamberlain, a man with no pre-war military experience, was a professor in Maine when the war broke out and enlisted in 1862. Around 2 years into his enlistment, he now commanded a brigade in Charles Griffin's division of Warren's 5th Corps. At 3 p.m., Warren's men began their assault. Most of the brigades weren't within sight of one another, which gave them the impression that their attacks weren't supported, even though they were. The rebel bullets tore into the advancing Federals, demolishing their battle lines. Chamberlain got across a stream and began to form up his men when a bullet ricocheted off the ground and into his right hip, passed through his lower abdomen, nicked his bladder and urethra, and came to rest just under the skin behind the bone near his left hip. He feared that if he went down that his men would stop, so he shoved his sword into the ground and propped himself up until his men passed. A loss of blood made him collapse. He waved off anyone taking him to the rear, thinking his wound was mortal, but was eventually taken to a hospital where one surgeon declared him a lost cause. His brother Tom got 2 surgeons from his old brigade to operate on Chamberlain and give him a chance at survival. The Iron Brigade in Lysander Cutler's division remembered the horrid attack. Just before we reached the crest, the enemy's batteries in our front opened upon us with canister shot. It seemed to us that every gun discharged a bushel of small shot through our ranks, and that the interval between charges was but a fraction of a minute. Lieutenant Colonel Rufus Dawes of the 6th Wisconsin wrote, "Our brigade was simply food for powder." Of Romaine Ayres's division, only one brigade, that under Kitching, made the attack with any vigor. The others advanced a short distance, then dug in. To the north, David Birney, one of the 2nd Corps division commanders, took command of the whole corps, because Winfield Scott Hancock's Gettysburg wound was festering and he had to rest in the rear. Meade kept firing messages to Birney and the other corps commanders to renew the offensive, and Birney began to do just that. He assembled between 7,000 and 9,000 men for the attack, with the brigades of Henry Medill and Daniel Chamberlain leading the attack. Chamberlain positioned his roughly 900-man strong regiment, the 1st Maine Heavy Artillery, in 3 battalions, one right behind the other. The 1st Battalion would clear obstructions, the 2nd would launch the attack, and the 3rd would be available for support or to launch a counterattack if it failed. Plus, 2 more of Chamberlain's regiments were in reserve. 4 more brigades would also be on hand to exploit any success. The men from Maine knew that the attack was going to be devastating. They were ordered to stack their knapsacks in the rear, and designated 2 men from each company to watch over them. Those chosen to stay behind began to record the names of loved ones and addresses so they knew where to send the belongings of those that perished in the assault. One soldier remembered, "We knew that very many of us were to die." Men turned to their comrades, bidding each other goodbye, and dictating messages to wives, fathers, mothers, sisters, and sweethearts, in case they should be among the slain and their comrades survived. Between 4 and 4:30 p.m., the order came to advance, with the men climbing the rise to get within view of the rebel works. One soldier remembered, "We were shot within the first 5 feet. The crash of 2,000 muskets rent the air as a long line of flame leaped from the works in our front, and the well-known yell of the Army of Northern Virginia mingled with the roar of the rebel batteries on our right and left as their canister followed the musket balls of the infantry and tore enormous gaps in our ranks. The 1st Maine Heavy Artillery made it to within 50 yards of the enemy before having to turn back, traversing the deadly open fields they had just crossed. Of the roughly 900 men in that regiment, 632 became casualties in about 10 minutes of fighting. Birney rode up to Chamberlain after the failed attack and asked him about his men. Chamberlain pointed toward the Confederate works and said, "There they are, out on that field where your tried veterans dared not go." The regiments and brigades that were to support Chamberlain failed to give them any assistance. Birney reported to Meade about the failed attack, and Meade told Birney to dig in. Meade then sent a message to Burnside asking him to make an attack, as Birney and Warren had both done. Part of the Ninth Corps formed up for another assault. Burnside's Chief of Staff, John G. Parke, would direct the attack. Part of Wilcox's and Potter's divisions executed their attack, but just like the other ones, blasts from the Confederate rifles and artillery forced them to look for cover and fall back. For days, the Union Army had battered the Confederate works and slowly pushed back the enemy, but it came at a high loss of life. One soldier wrote to his father that, "The feeling here in the Army is that we have been absolutely butchered. We can't afford to make many more such bloody attacks as we have been doing. The enemy will outnumber us if we do so. I tell you, Father, it is discouraging to see one's men and officers cut down and butchered time and again, and all for nothing." Captain Charles Francis Adams, Jr., wrote, "We have assaulted the enemy's works repeatedly and lost many lives, but I cannot understand it. Doubtless Grant has his reasons, and we must have faith, but certainly I have never seen the army so haggard and worn, so worked out and fought out, so dispirited and hopeless." A Pennsylvanian wrote, "The boys don't seem to think so much of General Grant now as they did some time ago. They think he has crowded us on their works too hard. It is nothing but charge, charge, and the ones that escape today fall tomorrow." It's difficult to ascertain the casualties for the fighting between June 15th and June 18th, but historians put Union casualties between 9,000 and 13,000, with the majority putting the casualties on the higher end of that estimate. The Confederates lost significantly less, being protected by earthworks. They probably lost around 2,500 in all.